Let me ask you something, and don't answer too quickly. Sit with it. Let it burn for a second. How many times have you said, "That's it. I'm done wasting time. Starting tomorrow, I'm changing everything"? You set the alarm, you write the plan, you make the promise, and then nothing. A week passes, maybe a day, maybe an hour, and you're right back in the same place. The workout skipped, the book unread, the goal shelved again. And the worst part? You know exactly what you should be doing. You just don't do it. Why? The world says it's because you're lazy, or unmotivated, or just not wired like those disciplined, high-performing machines you scroll past online. But that's a lie. And if you believe that lie long enough, you start building your identity around it. I'm just not consistent. I've never been disciplined. And every time you repeat that story, it digs deeper into your bones. But here's the truth. The Stoics knew centuries ago, and it changes everything. You are not your patterns. You are not your past. And discipline isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, slowly, consciously, like a muscle. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not a motivational poster. That's a declaration of war. Because until you understand that discipline begins in the mind, not in the mirror, you'll keep chasing techniques while ignoring the root. And the root is this: you're not lacking discipline. You're drowning in confusion. You don't follow through because your clarity is blurred. You're not sure what really matters. You're pulled in 10 different directions by comfort, distraction, expectation, and then you wonder why you can't stay the course. So let's clear it up. Let's start where discipline actually begins. Not with a to-do list, not with willpower. With clarity. The Stoics believed that no one could live with strength unless they first knew what to care about and what not to care about. If you seek tranquility, said Marcus, do less, or rather, do what's essential. That one line, do what's essential, is the cornerstone of discipline. Because most people fail not from doing too little, but from trying to do too much of what doesn't matter. They chase goals that don't align with their values. They adopt habits that don't belong to them. And then they wonder why nothing sticks. Discipline isn't about force, it's about focus. Imagine a river trying to flow in every direction at once. It becomes a swamp. But when you narrow the channel, the water cuts through stone. That's what your life can become when you stop scattering your energy across shallow distractions and start channeling it towards something real. But to do that, you have to confront the addiction most people never talk about, the addiction to comfort. Modern life has trained you to avoid effort like it's a disease. Everything's optimized for ease. Food delivered in minutes. Entertainment on demand. Validation at the tap of a screen. And every time you choose convenience over effort, your discipline erodes just a little more. Not because ease is bad, but because constant ease makes you weak. The Stoics didn't run from effort, they embraced it. Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." You don't grow by avoiding discomfort. You grow by stepping into it, willingly, deliberately, with eyes wide open. But that doesn't mean discipline has to be harsh. In fact, it's the opposite. Real discipline, the kind the Stoics practiced, is an act of love. Love for your future self. Love for your principles. Love for a life lived on your own terms. Most people think discipline is punishment. It's not. It's a gift. It's saying to yourself, I won't let the lowest version of me run the show anymore. It's refusing to hand your days over to impulses, to laziness, to distraction. It's reclaiming your agency. But that's not a single decision. It's a practice, a moment-by-moment choice to come back to your values, to keep the promises you make to yourself, even when no one's watching. Especially when no one's watching, because that's where discipline is forged, not in the gym, not in the journal, but in the invisible moment when you feel the pull to break your word and you don't. You say, "I'll just skip today." Discipline says, "Do it anyway." You say, "It doesn't matter." Discipline says, "Everything matters." You say, "I'll start tomorrow." Discipline says, "You only have today." That voice, that's what we're building here. Not a drill sergeant, not a bully, a guide, a compass, a quiet inner strength that doesn't flinch when life gets loud. Because life will get loud. You'll be tempted. You'll be tired. You'll be misunderstood. And in those moments, your discipline won't come from hype. It will come from principle, from knowing who you are and what you stand for. That's why Marcus wrote his meditations every night, not to show off, but to stay aligned, to remember what mattered, to reflect on where he drifted. That's discipline too, the discipline of reflection, of honesty, of course correction. So if you've failed 1,000 times, if you've broken every promise you made to yourself, if you're tired of feeling stuck, good. That means you're awake. That means you're done pretending. And now you're ready to build something real, something unshakable, something that doesn't rise and fall with your emotions, but stands tall because it's built on bedrock. That's what the next part is about. The real enemy isn't distraction. It's the part of you that believes the lie that you're not ready, that you're not capable, that you'll start later. But what if you didn't wait? What if you challenged that voice? What if you became the kind of person who acts, not perfectly, but consistently? If you're ready, we'll go there next. Because self-discipline doesn't start with force, it starts with truth. And that's where we go next. Let's start here. What actually stops you from following through? Not the surface level excuse, not the "I was tired" or "I was busy" line you tell yourself. I mean underneath all that. What really pulls your hand away from the work, away from the walk, away from the hard choice you swore you'd make this time? It's not fatigue. It's not time. It's something more subtle, more dangerous. It's resistance. That invisible, slippery force that shows up every single time you try to act in alignment with your higher self. It doesn't shout. It whispers. Take a break. This won't matter. No one's watching. And every time you believe it, you train your nervous system to run from effort. You reinforce a version of yourself that fears friction. And that's how weakness becomes a lifestyle. The Stoics knew this pattern. They saw it in themselves, and they didn't pretend it wasn't there. They studied it. They examined it. Marcus Aurelius didn't call himself a master of discipline. He wrote about how hard it was to get out of bed, how tempting it was to lie there, warm and still. But then he reminded himself, you were born to act. Not to lie in luxury, not to shrink from challenge, but to act. Because that's what it means to be human. That's the moment, right there. The inner confrontation, the quiet battle. No cameras, no applause, just you. Against the voice that says, delay is safer than discipline. Most people lose that battle, not once, but daily. And the reason? They wait to feel like winning. They treat discipline like a feeling. When I'm motivated, I'll act. But Stoicism destroys that lie completely. Discipline doesn't come from emotion, it creates it. Action first. Emotion follows. May you move because it's right, because it aligns, because it's who you said you were going to be, not because it feels good, because it usually doesn't. That's why it's discipline. You feel the weight, and you lift anyway. You feel the fear, and you speak anyway. You feel the pull to scroll, to delay, to drift, and you stay. That's how you build the muscle, one rep at a time. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to build self-discipline on top of self-contempt. They beat themselves into action. You're pathetic. Get it together. You always mess this up. That's not discipline. That's self-abuse wearing a motivational mask. And it's not sustainable. You can't hate yourself into greatness. You can only train yourself there through consistency, through truth, through respect. You don't have to scream at yourself. You have to be real with yourself. You have to stop lying about what you're avoiding. And you have to stop making every slip-up a story about your identity. Missing one workout doesn't make you a failure. Sleeping in one morning doesn't mean you're doomed. The Stoics never aimed for perfection. They aimed for honesty. Did I live in alignment today? No. Why? What distracted me? What excuse did I believe? How can I adjust? That's the process. Not guilt, not shame, just ownership. But let's make it even more practical. Right now, there's something you keep saying you want. Maybe it's physical strength. Maybe it's creative work. Maybe it's inner peace. And you keep telling yourself, I just need to be more disciplined. But you don't define what that looks like. So here's the challenge. Define it. In one sentence, I am someone who... Fill in the blank with the action, not the outcome, the action. I am someone who trains every morning. I am someone who doesn't check my phone before noon. I am someone who writes 1 hour a day. That's your contract, not with the world, with yourself. Now here's where the Stoic part kicks in. You treat that contract as sacred, like a warrior treats his code. Not because you're obsessed with rules, but because every time you honor it, you sharpen your character. You become someone you can trust. And that trust, that's where real confidence comes from. Not the empty kind, the rooted kind. The kind that doesn't need to be loud because it knows it's earned. But what about when you fail? When you break the contract, you don't quit, you return. Without drama, without story, just return. That's the key. Discipline isn't built by never slipping. It's built by returning faster each time you do. That's how you change your baseline. From reaction to intention. From delay to action. Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Not the other way around. Decide who you are, then act like it. Not once, daily. In small moments, no one sees. You'll be tempted to look for hacks, to chase better routines, better planners, better systems. But if your identity is shaky, none of those will last. Tools don't make you disciplined. Discipline is what makes the tools work. That's the real secret. Start with identity, with alignment, with clarity. Then let the systems follow. So ask yourself again, who are you becoming? Not in fantasy, in practice, in motion, in decision. Because that's the person you're training every time you choose or don't choose the hard thing. Every time you break a promise or keep it. You're not just getting something done, you're becoming someone. And that someone is built or broken in the quiet, invisible, ordinary moments most people waste. You're not going to be most people. You're going to become dangerous. Because the next part, this is where you learn how to weaponize discipline, not for performance, for freedom. Let's make something clear. Discipline is not punishment. It's not the grind. It's not the masochistic glorification of suffering for its own sake. Real discipline, Stoic discipline, is freedom. And if that sounds like a contradiction, then this is the part where your whole perspective shifts. You've been taught that freedom means doing what you want, eating what you crave, sleeping when you're tired, saying what you feel. But that kind of freedom is fake. It's just slavery in disguise. Because if your choices are driven by impulse, by comfort, by mood, you're not free. You're a servant, not to a master you can see, but to every tiny urge that whispers in your ear and pulls you off track. Seneca said it bluntly, "No man is free who is a slave to his body." And in our world, that's almost everyone. Slaves to comfort, slaves to distraction, slaves to the short-term fix that leaves you emptier than before. So when you choose discipline, you're not saying no to life. You're saying yes to something higher, something deeper, something real. You're saying yes to your values, to your vision, to the version of you that doesn't flinch when life gets heavy. But here's where it gets powerful. Because once you build that foundation, you can start to use discipline, not just to survive, but to lead. To lead yourself out of emotional chaos, to lead others who are stuck in confusion, to create space in a world that's constantly shouting. Because real discipline is quiet. It doesn't need a post. It doesn't need to be admired. It shows up whether anyone sees it or not. That's why it's so rare. But if you want it, if you want to live in a way where nothing owns you, you need one thing above all: clarity. Most people can't be disciplined because they're not clear. Not about who they are, not about what matters, not about what the trade-offs are. They just bounce from feeling to feeling, reacting, adjusting, starting over every Monday. And that's why they stay stuck. But when you're clear, everything changes. So let me ask you, what are your non-negotiables? And I don't mean your preferences. I mean the 3 to 5 actions that, if you lived them daily, would align you with your highest self. Not someone else's morning routine. Yours. Not the thing that looks cool. The thing that makes you strong. Write them down. Commit. Not with fanfare. Quietly. Like a soldier preparing for war. And here's the rule. You don't miss 2 days in a row. Ever. 1 day is a stumble. 2 is a signal. A pattern. A return to softness. To the default. You will be tested. That's guaranteed. Life will throw interruptions, pain, uncertainty, temptation. Discipline doesn't ignore that. It prepares for it. It says, I already decided who I am before this showed up. So I don't flinch. I adjust. I move. But I don't break. That's Stoic discipline. It's flexible like a tree, not rigid like glass. It bends, but doesn't snap. And here's what most people never realize. Discipline gets easier with use. Not because the world changes, but because you change. You stop entertaining your own excuses. You stop negotiating with your weakness. You stop treating emotions like instructions. You can feel tired and act. You can feel anxious and act. You can feel lazy and act. Because the feeling isn't the problem. The surrender is. That's what Epictetus taught. He didn't say, don't feel weakness. He said, don't obey it. But this takes training. So you train. And the reps are not glamorous. They're brushing your teeth when no one's watching. They're choosing water over soda. They're turning off your phone instead of scrolling. They're doing the thing you said you'd do, especially when you don't feel like it. And the reward? Peace. Not the peace of everything being perfect. The peace of knowing you are not controlled by things outside of you. That's power. That's freedom. And most people will never know it because they think it's too much, too hard, too restrictive. But what they don't see is that the opposite of discipline isn't freedom, it's regret. And regret is heavier than any routine. So if you want to be free, build the life that removes regret. One disciplined choice at a time. Now here's where it gets real. You can't build this life in a vacuum. You live in a culture that rewards distraction, that sells comfort, that mocks restraint, that applauds indulgence. You're swimming upstream, and if you don't realize that, you'll think you're broken. You're not broken. You're awake. You're starting to see that everyone else is hypnotized by their cravings, their likes, their fears, their patterns. And you're waking up. That's what discipline does. It shakes you out of the trance. You start asking better questions. Why do I always reach for my phone when I feel bored? Why do I keep eating junk when I know it makes me feel worse? Why do I keep avoiding the work I know matters? You don't judge yourself. You observe. You study. You act. That's the Stoic way. Calm, clear, relentless. You don't punish yourself. You refine yourself. And when you do that, day after day, you start to notice something strange. You don't need as much. You don't crave as much. You don't panic when plans change. You don't spiral when someone rejects you. You are no longer tossed by every emotion. You are rooted, and that is terrifying to people who need you to react. They will call you cold. They will call you obsessive. They will try to pull you back into comfort. Let them. You are building something sacred. You're choosing a life that most people will never understand. And the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. Discipline is not a cage, it is a key. And the door it unlocks? Your potential. Now, the next part is where we take everything you've built, the focus, the commitment, the clarity, and test it under pressure. Because if your discipline can't survive chaos, it's not discipline, it's decoration. We're not here to decorate, we're here to become unshakable. Now we get to the moment most people quit, not because they're weak, not because they're lazy, but because their discipline was only built for good days, clear skies, full energy, no distractions. But what happens when things go wrong? When your schedule falls apart, when someone betrays you, when life gets loud and messy and unfair, that's when the truth shows up. Because if your self-discipline can't survive pain, it's not self-discipline. It's performance. It's convenience dressed up as commitment. And that's where Stoicism separates itself from every other system. It doesn't just help you act right when life is smooth. It teaches you how to remain whole when everything around you is breaking. Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing his meditations from a beach. He was writing them from battlefields, surrounded by war, betrayal, sickness, loss. And still, he chose the inner path. Still, he practiced restraint. Still, he returned to his principles. That is discipline under fire. And that's the version of you we're building now. Because let's be honest, most people aren't disciplined. They're just comfortable. Take away the routine, the gym, the job, the support system, and their strength collapses. But not you. You're building something deeper, something untouchable. That starts by accepting a hard truth. Your environment will not always support your growth. Sometimes it will attack it. And if you're not prepared for that, if you expect the world to make it easy, you'll crumble. So here's the mindset shift. Expect resistance. Train for it. Anticipate the breakdown, the betrayal, the inconvenience. And when it comes, don't flinch. Don't curse it. Use it. The Stoics called this amor fati, a love of fate, not passive acceptance, active engagement, seeing every obstacle as training, as sharpening, as the exact test you needed to become who you said you wanted to be. Epictetus said, "Difficulties are things that show a person what they are, not what they feel. What they are. Because when the plan breaks, the real discipline begins. You miss your morning? That's not failure. That's an opportunity to practice flexibility. Someone mocks your routine? That's not insult. That's a chance to build inner confidence. Your emotions flare up and try to knock you off track? That's not weakness. That's your training partner arriving for another rep. You begin to see nothing is a reason to stop. Everything is a reason to deepen. That's the shift. You stop trying to protect your routine and start protecting your principle. Because the Stoic doesn't say, I need this condition to be perfect. The Stoic says, I am the condition. It's not what happens that matters. It's what you do next. But that kind of power only comes when you stop seeing discipline as optional and start seeing it as identity. You're not someone who tries to be disciplined. You are someone who is disciplined. Big difference. One is effort, the other is embodiment. That embodiment comes from consistency. And consistency doesn't mean never missing. It means never quitting, never letting one off day spiral into a lost week, never using a setback as an excuse to lower your standard. You fail a workout, you go the next day. You overeat, you reset the next meal. You scroll too long, you lock the phone and start over. You stop negotiating with the past. You start deciding in the present, every time. And over time, the identity shifts. You stop needing motivation. You stop chasing dopamine. You stop needing someone to hold you accountable. Because now, you are the standard. People feel it when you walk into a room. Not because you're louder, but because you're rooted. Not perfect. Rooted. You know who you are. You know what matters. You know how to suffer with grace and how to win without pride. That's Stoic discipline. Not just daily action, but daily alignment. Even under pressure, even in pain, even when no one claps. And let's talk about that, because one of the final traps is applause. You get disciplined, and people start to notice. They praise your transformation. They admire your habits. They call you inspiring. And suddenly, you start performing again. Not for yourself, but for them. And if you're not careful, your identity shifts from discipline to display. You start adjusting your habits to look good, not to do good. You trade real growth for public approval. That's not power. That's a trap. So here's your rule. Do it in silence. Not always, but often. Train without posting. Reflect without sharing. Improve without announcing. Because if you need a witness to be consistent, you're not consistent. You're codependent. The Stoic doesn't act for the crowd. The Stoic acts from the soul. Marcus Aurelius had scribes, soldiers, servants. He could have published his meditations as propaganda, but he didn't. He wrote them for himself, in private, as reminders, as accountability, as self-mastery. That's your model. Private excellence, invisible discipline, rooted in principle, not popularity. Because the real reward isn't applause, it's integrity. It's the quiet moment at the end of a hard day when you know you didn't fold, you didn't betray yourself, you didn't chase the easy way out. That's the win. And if you can hold on to that, then you're ready for the final part, the part that most people never get to. Because it's not about doing more, it's about doing less, but doing it forever. Now we reach the final turning point, the quiet one, the one that doesn't come with fire or fanfare, the one that separates those who dabble in discipline from those who are forged by it. Because building self-discipline isn't about momentum anymore. It's about identity. It's about simplicity. And it's about what happens when there's no reward, no motivation, no urgency, just you and the moment. Most people can stay disciplined when it's new. When there's a goal, when there's a deadline, when the pain of inaction still stings. But what happens after the transformation? After the praise wears off? After the results settle in and comfort starts whispering again? That's when most people drift, slowly, silently, back to old patterns. Not because they want to, but because they never learned the final rule of real self-discipline. You don't do it until it works. You do it until it becomes who you are. Discipline isn't something you graduate from. It's not a phase. It's not a means to a better lifestyle. It is the lifestyle. That's the Stoic mindset. Seneca didn't write because he wanted to impress anyone. He wrote to stay sharp, to stay honest, to stay aligned. His writings weren't for show. They were a mirror, a blade, a way to cut through the noise. And that's what this part of your life must become. Quiet, simple, unshakable. Because the final form of discipline is devotion. Not religious, not theatrical. Just this, a life of deliberate action, guided by unchanging principles. You don't wake up and decide how you feel. You wake up and remember who you are, and you live from that place. So let's talk about how to make that real. First, strip it down. If your discipline depends on hacks, routines, trackers, or mood boosters, you're building on sand. Those things can help, but they're not the foundation. The foundation is simple. What do I want to be able to trust myself with? That's the core question. Can I trust myself to do what's necessary, even when it's boring? Can I trust myself to keep my word, even when no one checks? Can I trust myself to act from values, not feelings? That trust is everything. And it's earned, not given. You earn it by showing up. Every day. Especially on the small days. Especially when no one's looking. You eat the clean meal. You write the journal entry. You meditate for 5 minutes. You show up for the rep, the breath, the quiet action. Not because it's glamorous, because it's who you are. And when you fall off, because you will, you don't spiral. You don't explain. You don't start over. You return. No guilt, no drama. Just the next step. Discipline without ego. That's mastery. And here's the twist. When you live like this long enough, it becomes love. Not love for the grind. Not love for suffering. Love for alignment. Love for waking up every day and knowing, I trust myself. That's freedom. Because most people are slaves. Not to others, but to their own inconsistency, their own distractions, their own excuses. The Stoic is free, not because life is easy, but because their choices are no longer negotiable. They've been decided a long time ago, and they've been lived every day since. So if you're still chasing motivation, stop. If you're still trying to find the perfect system, stop. If you're still hoping that one day discipline will just click, stop. Make the decision. Not once, but again and again. Until it's no longer a decision. It's just who you are. That's the final form. Not hype, not perfection, consistency, simplicity, clarity. You don't need to be a machine. You just need to stop being a stranger to your own standards. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep your word to yourself. And if you do that, you become the rarest kind of person. The kind who walks through life calmly, quietly, unmoved by noise, unshaken by failure, unimpressed by applause. Not because you don't care, but because you've already chosen your compass. And no matter what happens, you stay on course. That is Stoic self-discipline, and it's yours now. Not because you heard it, but because you'll live it. And if you do, you'll never need another video, because you've become the message. This is Pure Stoic Life, and your life is your philosophy now.